Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests. Thank you for coming. So it's been a privilege to be here to pay respect to KK first, because KK has been a role model for many technology journalists and editors like myself around the world. So it's actually been a privilege here to be on the same stage with you. And interestingly, that the first time, also the last time I met with KK was in October 2008 in Beijing Microsoft Research Center. So it's about 5,400 days ago. So today we're here again to discuss about the next 5,000 years. So I think it's, it's pretty much fate.
5,000 days.
5,000 days, yeah. So it's pretty much fate, I believe. It's a short but very interesting speech you just made for about half an hour. Also, you start with Asia, with China, and that's also a very important chapter in your book. And your story with Asia goes, long way back. You made your first trip to Asia in 1972, about 51 years ago, to Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan. So back then, a lot of roads in Taiwan were covered with basically dirt, right, at that time, so which is very different from today. And in your book, you mentioned that Asia is going to be much more important in the next 5,000 days, with China and India being the center. And, that really made people like me, and I'm sure the audience as well, because China is a very important neighbor to us, whether in business, trade, also in politics as well. So also China is very aggressively investing in technology, trying to improve itself and to catch up with the strong power like the US over the past 2 years. So there are cities like Shenzhen you mentioned, which is pretty much like Silicon Valley in your book. So my question is that given recent China and US tension, and there are basically some restrictions on exporting, equipment, technology chips, and products to China. Do you think that is going to kind of jeopardize or kind of impact the development of China in terms of technology, as what we know years back?
I would say a couple of things. One is I think the general rise of China, the rise of India, the rise of Taiwan, the rise of Vietnam, that in general, I think this is going to happen almost independent of the politics. I think that the ambition, the drive of those peoples, the hundreds of millions of billions of those people, is such that that for the most part, they're going to continue to rise independent of the actual politics in between the countries. And so certainly some things will accelerate that and others can slow it down, but as a general rule, the ambition to become a modern force in the world is shared among them, and they're going to continue. Certain things that the U.S. does in the relationship it has will help accelerate that or not. I think some of the, right now they have some of the bans on China. I think that's short-sighted. I think they're, in the short term they'll have effect, but I think in the long term it accelerates the creation of these technologies in the local areas. So, which is, I think, good. I think we want to accelerate them. So in a kind of a weird way, I don't think it's going to do what people in the U.S. hope it does, because I think it's short term, and I think that in the long term it will accelerate the creation of alternative capacities, and I think that's good. And I think the more capacity that we have for making stuff in the world, that's good overall. And so I think we're just at the beginning of this new world order, where the entire world and everybody in the world, they want the same thing. I talk to a lot of the young people wherever I go to, and they want what everybody wants. They want to have a nice, comfortable, air-conditioned room that running water and plumbing and Wi-Fi. Okay, and they want to have a job that matters to them. It's becoming pretty universal. There are some social differences between people, but by and large, that's what they want, and they're working towards that. And I think if we can accelerate that, that's good. And so I think we can get distracted by the geopolitics, which will make a difference in the short term. But I don't think it's going to make a difference in the long term.
And just a follow-up question that Taiwan is not mentioned in the book. I'm just curious that if there's something you'd like to, share with our audience here, if there is a part or role for Taiwan to play in this coming Asia age, what would that be?
Other than making the chips for the entire world.
Other than the chips.
Yeah. So I do think that as we evolve as a global economy, a global society, that there will be specialization in different regions. We see, Shenzhen becoming this manufacturing network that is unlikely to disappear. We have the Silicon Valley software network, and it's a network in the sense that it's like an ecosystem where you have many, many different species, and they're all codependent on each other. And the whole thing works because there are so many codependencies, so many relationships. And but there's still a lot of things that have not yet been invented or are on the way to being invented that also could benefit from that kind of ecosystem. I think that there's a high-tech health nexus that some country in the world, and maybe it's Taiwan, will understand that being able to offer the world's best medical attention requires a whole ecosystem of all kinds of providers, specialists, technology, political support, and that people all over the world would come to either get it or rely on it in some way. And that's a possible role that a country like Taiwan could provide the world. And, we see a little bit of kind of fashion happening a little bit in Italy. And that could continue where, they were the center of generating fashions quickly, and there's an ecosystem for that. You see finance in New York and London, but that's just beginning. So I think, I don't know enough about Taiwan to know what some of its other capabilities are, but I think there are going to be plenty of opportunities for areas, and even areas the size of Taiwan, to become the center of that kind of power. And biotech is another potential one for some country the size of Taiwan.
And because you mentioned the culture meet, basically in the biotech chapter, and Taiwan's pretty good. I mean, although not known to many other countries, but Taiwan's very good at making this vegetarian food.
Yeah.
So that could be one part, like you mentioned, that would be useful to the world.
Yeah. There could be an ecosystem where they were doing, and again, it's not just making culture meat in volume, it's the fact that you are inventing new kinds of it, that you are being able to ensure the quality, that you have a creativity in developing many different species, and that will require a very, very complicated system of inputs, raw materials, metrics, expertise. It's sort of biotech, and it's a little bit agriculture. So I think that's what the world, when I imagine the world in the future, it's like this. It's different regions with their specialty, and they develop over time thousands and thousands of small companies that are all supporting each other towards this larger specialty.
Okay. Another big element in your book is about the AI. And basically, the book was published this year, and it was written, I think, last year, right? So before the generative AI like ChatGPT came to everybody's attention. But the ChatGPT is basically far beyond most people's expectation and still growing. So it created two extreme sentiments. One is that very positive about what AI can deliver and can help us. The other is the kind of doomsday kind of sentiment that it's going to be the Terminator, it's going to replace people or kind of jeopardize the human species. So both extreme sentiment exist, and there are more and more people thinking or containing there should be regulation regarding the AI research. But also in your book, you don't believe so much about regulation. You think the industry or technology itself will eventually, in the long term, will reach the balance. So I'd like to get your views on this, whether the current AI and the foreseeable AI development is going to kind of exceed or over our control, or should there be some kind of government intervention, like regulation coming in to kind of set the tone for it?
So I think regulation is very, very necessary to advance technologies. And what we often find is that often the established leaders in a technology want regulation because it reduces the uncertainty. And but I think we need to be very, very hesitant about premature regulation. So regulation needs to come when we are very, very clear about what the harms are. We have evidence for those harms, and we're trying to in some way manage the risk. But the problem right now with AI is that we have no idea how it works. We have no idea actually what it's good for. We have no evidence of any harm from it. All the harm that people are talking about are imaginary harms, are harms that we can imagine, but there's actually not any real harm. And so, so what we don't want to do is prematurely regulate it, because that's a disaster when you're preventing it from growing before you even know what it is. So I think once you do have a sense of what it's good for and what it's bad for, you have evidence for both, then regulation actually can accelerate the implementation, the investment, because it reduces the risk and uncertainty. So we're at the point right now where we still don't know about AI, what it's good for and what it's bad for. And therefore, we should be very, very slow to regulate. There is a minimal amount of regulation going on, but the reason it's not very effective because it's very vague, because AI is very vague. And so, so I think we have more than enough regulation at the moment for this time in its development.
And so AI is still in very early stage, so it still will take some time to develop and evolve and come up with more functions, features. So given that mostly at this stage, the big companies today might not be the winners in the long run. So
I'm betting that they're not going to be.
They're not going to be. So like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, you don't think they probably have a better shot than?
No, I would be shocked if they were the dominant AI players in 15 years, because it's never happened before. It's never happened where you have a dominant player in one field remain and become dominant in a new one. And so I think it's no accident that the biggest one right now is OpenAI, which was not Microsoft, Amazon, Google. 4 years ago, when people were listing the possible AI giants, they did not mention OpenAI. Okay, and so it's not to say that Microsoft and Google will become AI companies without a doubt, but it's very unlikely they become the dominant ones, because because usually what happens is they cannot afford to do the kinds of things that are going to seem crazy and unprofitable and unmarketable in the beginning. Just like OpenAI did the crazy thing of training, 100,000 GPUs That was insane. Nobody knew that was going to work. Google could not afford to have done that. And afford meaning that they would not be allowed to. There would be no business sense. There would be, the accountants wouldn't let them do that. And that's what you need with a startup, is they have nothing to lose by trying things.
So usually history repeats itself. So in the past, like AT&T, IBM, Xerox, and Kodak, Nokia, I mean, basically not the dominant player today.
Nobody could compete with IBM in making computers. You try to make a computer, IBM always won. The only thing that displaced IBM was a software company, Microsoft. Microsoft came along, they were doing software, and then they became the dominant company. And many people try to compete against Microsoft, doing an OS, an operating system. And many tried, and many lost a lot of money. And nobody could beat Microsoft until Google was not a Microsoft. It was not an OS. It was a search engine. Who ever heard of that? And so then Google became the dominant one. And many people tried to do search, tried to do them better and displace Google. None of them worked. And it was a social media company, Facebook, not a search engine, that came along to displace Google. And now the same thing with AI. There's who's going to displace the social media? It's not going to be Google or Facebook. It's going to be an outsider, OpenAI, coming along and making an AI that will displace search and social media. And OpenAI and Google was not the first search engine. It was like the 30th search engine. OpenAI is like the first AI, but it's unlikely to be the last AI company.
So whatever new technology might appear, but the course of history is going to remain, just like what we discussed. So the big players today usually may not be the new players tomorrow, the day after. Usually there will be newcomers from startups, whether it's today's startups or tomorrow's startups. Usually.
Yeah. I'm going to guess that the dominant company in 15 years probably has not even been started today. That would be my guess. The thing that everybody talks about, the thing that is the dominant one, that has the most money, that is the biggest company in the world, probably does not exist today.
Okay. And in your book, you also mentioned the next iPhone equivalent product may come from China, right? Yeah. So that reminds me of an interesting, story about in 1981, IBM released its first PC. Apple even, placed a big advertisement on Wall Street Journal to congratulate IBM. And in 1984, Steve Jobs had another advertisement, for the Macintosh. It basically says because of Macintosh, 1984 would not be like 1984, like George Orwell said. But today, IBM is no longer, dominating the computer industry, but Apple does. So do you think that kind of same story would happen to Apple again, like in the future? Because today is a dominant player in many areas in this industry.
Yeah, I certainly think that Apple could come to be seen as an IBM big brother in the future. And we can see right now, Apple is kind of behind the AI. They're not, the Siri on the phone, it's not very smart. And so they could be seen as a monolithic big brother in the future. It's really possible by someone else. Again, I think smart glasses will come after smartphones, and so it's very unlikely that Apple figures out how to make the smart glasses that everybody wants to wear. It's possible, but I would be very surprised if it was Apple who figured it out. It's going to be some startup, maybe in China, maybe Taiwan, that figures out how to do that.
I think Apple is trying to catch up with its Vision Pro.
Yes.
Maybe, but
I know I haven't been able to try it out, so I don't know. Maybe it works, but it's very slow. I know that the people in Apple itself are not happy with it. I think it may take a startup, and there are many startups who are trying. It's not like there's a lack of trying. Business is very, very difficult to do.
Okay. And given the productivity generated by AI, whether it's today's AI or the future AI, that not everybody needs to work like today, like 5 days a week, maybe perhaps 3 days a week, or maybe some people they don't need to work, because there might be some kind of ubiquitous basic income, universal basic income.
Perhaps.
What do you think about that?
So for those who aren't familiar with the idea of universal basic income, so it's this idea that a government would pay a minimum amount of money that maybe you could survive on. And that would be kind of like a basic subsidy for people. And that the idea is that it would be really good for poor people, but also good for students and even the economy in general, or artists, because you have many people trying things. They weren't really worried about getting enough food and having medical coverage. I think it's a worthy experiment. And there are some people experimenting. And so I would say we should have more experiments where you try that out and you see what happens. I think it's something that you can't figure out just by thinking about it. I think there are a lot of things you cannot figure out by thinking about it. You actually have to try. So you can think about it as all that you want, and you're not going to figure it out. So you actually have to try. You have to have experiments, try in different places, look at the results, be very academic and thorough about it. And I would base what I think about it on the results of those experiments.
And if there is going to be, and I'm sure there will be, that some work, a lot of work to be replaced or complemented by AI, that means people like, general people, they don't have to work so many hours or even don't have to work. Financially, it could be subsidized by this UBI. But what about the meaning originally defined by work? Because many people, they get, their life meaning through work. So once that work does not exist or is becoming, less than before. So that is a term by Yuval Harari called the useless class.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with that. So what do you think about that, given the kind of positive effect brought by AI with the productivity, but on the other hand, that there might be some people losing their meaning because they work less or does not work at all?
I think in the long term, we might have to rethink what we mean by work. I think in the next 5,000 days, I don't think that that's going to be an issue. I think in the next 5,000 days, I think, again, many people's own jobs may be refigured because of AI. You may have to be doing something slightly different. But I don't think there's going to be a lot of unemployment and not working because of AI. It changes the way that we work rather than not working. In the longer term, hundreds of years, we may have to rethink that, but we have a lot of time to figure that out. So I would just say the fear of everybody having unemployment because of AI is way overblown. There's no evidence. There's very few people who've lost a job to AI. Very, very few. And so I think that, again, jobs can be reconfigured. Your job description, the tasks you do may change. But I don't think people were going to be out of work because of AI.
Yeah, I like that because there will be a new definition of work, like spend time having dinners with your family or play with your children might be the new type of work. Because there's a part in your book like the Amish people who still live life the traditional way. They have their own standard of choosing what technology they want. Basically, in your book, you mentioned that out of 15 miles, as I remember, that because they don't use cars, they still use horse, right? Because they think it's important to have 3 meals with the family, so they don't let their children to go to school or very far. So there might be different standards, not like today. There might be diverse or many more different standards for using technology or decide what kind of benefit they want to get from technology.
I think you're right in the long term. I think that's going to be a much slower change. I think we're seeing a more immediate change we see is whether people need to go into an office or not. That's been one of the effects of COVID is people deciding that they're simply not going to go into the office every day. They're still working, but they're working in a hybrid version where they work at home 2 or 3 days and they go into the office 2 or 3 days. The total amount of work may be the same or even more, but that pattern is changing. And that could stick. That could be something that we might see in the next 15 years where that pattern of 2 or 3 days at home, 2 or 3 days at work becomes standard. That's possible. But it isn't really changing the status of work itself in that time period. So that's what I meant by kind of working remotely becoming the norm.
Okay. So next question is, let's talk about the blockchain, crypto, and NFT, because when this book was published this year, basically, I think it's before the Sam Bankman-Fried incident happened. So if you're going to revise this chapter about blockchain, are there some new insights or some kind of ideas to be put into the blockchain chapter?
Well, this book was actually written before COVID, so 4 years ago. I don't even remember what I said about blockchain 4 years ago. So tell me, there's no English version of this book, by the way.
Okay. It's on Japanese version.
There's a Chinese version and a Japanese version. There's no English version, so I don't even know what I said 4 years ago. So tell me what this says about blockchain.
It says basically about blockchain is a kind of a distributed ledger that helps to, on the one hand, identify the identity of the users, also keep safety because it's not kind of private. It can be public. So and
I think that's all still true.
Right. But given there are a lot of hype to invest in the crypto and NFT, I say hype because there are really quite a lot last year. But given the Sam Bankman-Fried fraud incident, so people start to criticize about the blockchain and NFT. So this year it becomes a bit slower than the previous years, last year and the year before.
Yeah. So my recollection is that I talked about blockchain, which is a technology that enables this distributed trust, distributed, decentralized authority. And that's in some ways separate from Bitcoin, which is the currency and investments like gold. And so I'd be very surprised if blockchain was really, really useful in just as a currency. We see very little evidence, and I think I might have said this, of ever being a currency and using it to buy and sell things. It's a store of value like gold. We don't use gold to buy and sell things either. But as a technology that might underpin something like the mirror world, or something that's very distributed, where you are trying to track things in a distributed fashion. You want to know whether something's authentic. You want to know whether you can trust it. Blockchain may play a role in that. And there's a lot of technical things that need to be figured out, and there's people who are working on it very quietly because there's no money to be made. That's the problem with the blockchain, is that if it's not a big currency, it's very expensive to do. It's not cheap to either run or to develop. And so I think there is innovations, and are people working on the blockchain as a potential back office things that you don't see, but they're not getting a lot of attention because they weren't making, as I said, it was always go up. There was this idea that Bitcoin always goes up, and then came down, and everybody was unhappy. So yes, I think there was attention given to it because of the fraud and the investments that were lost. But there are people who are working on it quietly and trying to see if this could be useful in a different way than just making money. And so that has yet to be proved. It might be that after all that investment, blockchain doesn't work. That's possible. I suspect it'll be good for something, but we're still looking for the right job for it.
Because what blockchain brought is there are a series of new terms like the DeFi, decentralized finance, GameFi, or SocialFi. But after this FTX and recently the Binance scandal, people start to question whether this decentralized web application will still exist and prevail in the future.
Exactly. In fact, we noticed walking around Taipei yesterday, there's a blockchain conference.
There was a blockchain week, yeah.
It's happening right now. And so if you're early, you can walk over there, leave here and go over there. Here's the thing I would say about, this is what I've been saying for at least 5 years, maybe more, which is, yeah, I'll have a conversation about blockchain with one condition, which is that we don't talk about money, right? As soon as you talk about money and blockchain, it's in the wrong direction. Let's talk about blockchain being an expense where you're paying for blockchain because it's giving you a value. It's doing something valuable. Right now, most people are interested in blockchain because it's going to make money. I don't want to hear about that. That's just a single dimension. So if we're going to have a conversation, we talk about blockchain being useful in some other way than making money. So, DeFi, that's all about making money. I'm not interested in it. Let's talk about a way in which it can be useful to people where it's an expense where you have to pay for it. It's going to cost you money rather than make you money. So until it gets there, I think it's not really going to have any effect.
I would say that 80% of the people I met with this blockchain circle are for money.
Right.
So I think basically that's what is so hot over the past few years, and now why it's facing the problem now.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to talk about it, not about money, but something else other than money.
Okay. So next question is about the mega cities. As you mentioned in the presentation, also in the book as well, that there are going to be this city where most population will gather to around the city, and but the question is that because the work from home trend is still prevailing, so I think there's quite some people believe that you don't need to work or live in big cities, and you can still contribute what you know. You can still make handsome salary by working elsewhere. So I'd like to get your views on why is it still important that these mega cities evolve and become important for the rest of us.
I think there are many different factors that are operating to make mega cities. I think there are what they call scaling laws, meaning that in a curious way, the bigger a city gets, the better it gets. The less crime it has per person, the more options it has per person. So there's a scaling law about growth in human endeavors where cities get better as they get bigger. And so that's it's not like people saying, well, I want the city to be bigger. It's just that bigger cities tend to be better because of the way things scale up. And so they also, as I was saying, they're also better for the environment. They have more opportunities. And so the reason why we see megacities is because the people living in them feel they're getting a better deal than if they live in a smaller city.
Okay, so bigger cities still will be more efficient for people to work. And like you mentioned in the book, if you want to operate a big projects, still need a big team, big organization, and they better be close to each other. So they'll, information transformation will be easier.
Yes.
Okay. So the next question is regarding the education part. So learn how to learn is a very important capability, as you mentioned in your book. Also, that idea is expressed by many experts as well. With this, technology and AI, so how do we make this learn how to learn concept more much easier or more equivalent to everyone, including from adults to children?
Yeah, so there's a real question that people have. Well, in this new world that we're going into, what should my child study at school to have the best chance of having a good life? And should they learn programming? Should they learn AI? Should they, become a doctor? And I think the answer is that when you graduate, I would say by high school, that there's one skill that you should have above all others, and that is the ability to learn. And I would say maybe even more so, the ability to optimize your own personal learning. So when you graduate, you should have an idea of how you personally learn best. What is the procedure? What are the practices that you would use to learn something new? And everybody is probably going to have a different answer if you're really optimizing it for yourself. Some people might need to have more repetitions. Some people might need more sleep in between repetitions. Some people might need to hear it audibly. Some people might need to read it visually. So you should know, and I think nobody does when they graduate. I don't know, even myself. But that's what we should be teaching in school with teachers, testing students, and helping them to understand how they can optimize their own learning in all the different varieties, whether it's kinetic in sports or language, whatever it is, testing and training and working to develop that skill in a very concrete way, saying, so when you leave, you say, I know what I need to do to optimize my own learning, whatever it is I'm going to be doing. And so, so it's like a course or a whole school focused on learning how to learn. And there are many, many things around that would help that, but I think that explicit focus on saying you are graduating knowing how you can optimize your learning, because that's the main thing you're going to be doing for the rest of your life.
Okay, I have one more question, then I'll open to the floor for questions from the audience. So for people that want to be Kevin Kelly, what would you recommend? Are there some books? Can you make a list of books that recommend to the audience that have the ability to spot trends, to tell the future, to see through all these?
Yeah. So as I said in the very beginning, I'm trying not to make predictions. I'm trying to look at where trends are going, a general direction, saying here we're moving in this direction. And so I like to talk about trying to predict the present. A lot of my time is spent trying to understand exactly what's going on. So like say with AI. Well, there's lots of hypothetical, a lot of imagination, which is good. But like, I'm trying to think, how are people actually using it? How does it actually change their job? The teachers who are using AI, what do they actually know from this so far? How have the students actually changed what they're doing? So focusing on actually trying to see what's happening right now is half of the job of trying to imagine where it's going. Because I know from doing workshops with people called scenario workshops, where you try to imagine the future with a group of people. Maybe there's 20 people. You're trying to help them think about where their business is going to go. The most difficult thing, it turns out, each time, is for people to forget what they think the future should be, is to let go of their expectations. Because what we know is that, 20 years ago, we would not predict the world today. If someone told you about the world today 20 years ago, you'd say, you wouldn't believe it. That's impossible. That can't happen. And so we know that the world's going to be also improbable in the future as well. And so trying to let go of our expectations is a big part of what I have to do, and what you have to do thinking about it. So you have to kind of allow yourself to believe things that seem maybe a little impossible, but not all possible things, just some of them. So that's one thing. And I would say the second thing that I like to look at is areas where there's new language being made, where there's new words. Like blockchain was an example, or other places where there's new, like in AI right now, there's a lot of new language being made. That's a good sign that we're moving into the frontier. I like to give a bit of advice to young people and say, if you're young and you have any chance, well, if you have a chance, work on something where you can't explain what you're doing very easily, where it takes a long time to explain to your parents what it is that you do. That's a really good sign. Okay, that's a good sign that you're into something in the future, because we don't have words for it. We don't have names for what it is that you're doing. So that's a good sign. That's a sign that there's something happening there.
Yeah, for example, you had a quite unusual kind of career because you dropped out of college the first year,
right,
and spent several years traveling in Asia and then to the rest of the world, and come up with your kind of framework of knowledge. So like you said, that listen to technology that help you understand the future. That's something you came up with through all these kind of lifetime learning too.
Yeah, yeah. I talk about listening to technology because there's some things that technology kind of wants to do, like in the digital world, things want to be copied. So you kind of have to say, okay, you can't stop copying things. Copy will just happen. You have to kind of work with that. And the same thing with AI right now. I think machines want to have thinking, so we can't stop thinking, but we can guide it and steer it. That's what I call listening to the technology.
Okay, I have a few more questions, but before that, I'd like to open to the floor.
That'd be great.
Let the audience ask their questions. So
there's a method, I guess, right here, and this will help me. Feel free to ask in Chinese. I'll have a translator.
我们接下来可以把那个时间开放给我们现场的朋友们可以提问，那可以利用前面的麦克风来提问，那中文或英文都可以，因为我们有同步翻译，会帮 KK 翻成英文。那前面这位女士。
Hi, I'm so excited to see you in person. So I have actually 3 questions, if that's possible.
Let's start with one.
Can we just start with one?
Okay. Then I'm just gonna ask a very personal question. What made you decide to make AI art every day on your computer?
So every day I have been making art with an AI engine, and I am very comfortable in co-signing it as a co-creation, because I will spend a half hour to an hour working on each image. And I was doing it in part because I learned about these technologies by trying to use them myself, to see the present, to see how they're actually being used, how they actually affect me. And what I discovered is that the AI, rather than, even though it could paint or draw something better than me, it didn't replace me. It didn't put me out of a job as an artist. It actually was a new kind of creativity. It's sort of like it was a co-creation. I felt that there was a team, me and the AI together were making this thing. And it was a little bit like my photography, where I feel like I'm kind of going through, looking for a promising area, and it's making images, and I'm going, nah, that's not right, that's not really interesting. oh, well, that's kind of broken. And then I'm walking over here, and then I'm spending more time over here trying to make something. Oh, this is not going to work. I need to go somewhere else. And it was a little bit like photography where you're kind of moving around. And so in the very old days when photography was first coming to the world of painting, a lot of painters were upset because they said, photographer, all you have to do is you're just pressing a button. There's no art in that. And a lot of people, when AI came along, says you're just pressing the button. There's no AI, there's no work in that. But it's like photography in the sense there's a lot of work. You're moving around, you're setting it up, you're angling, you're giving good prompts. So what I got out of it, to answer your question, was I was trying to surprise myself. I like art that surprises me, and my own art. I make my own art to surprise myself, and this was a way of surprising myself in a way that was genuinely surprising. So every day I was making something to surprise myself, and it was very, very good at that. It was actually very hard to make it obedient, to actually make something that I wanted to see in my mind. It was really, really hard to do that. And that's one of the limitations of AI right now, is that it's really good at surprising and very hard to make it obedient. I discovered that by using it every day. And so the meta reason for me doing it was to understand what AI was by actually using it every day. And that's the message I would say to people is the only way we can steer technology is through using it. So if you want to influence technology like AI, you have to use it a lot. And it's through that use you'll be able to see what's good for it and what can't do. And that use will enable you to steer in the right direction.
So learning by doing, basically.
Well, I would say managing by use. I would say we're what's the word I want? Steering technology. We're managing the technology by using it. Understanding by use. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And so the lady in the back and then the gentleman in the front later.
Hi, Mr. Kelly。我有一个问题想要请教的是，不知道您对人口高龄化的这件事情，是不是影响了你对未来5000天的这个科技的趋势的观察，以及也会比较好奇说，您在当中有提到是中国，它可能会变成一个未来的关键的角色嘛？那高龄化它们其实也面临很严峻的这样子的问题，那不知道您对这样子的趋势有什么样子的看法？
I think aging society is very, very real, and I think that we collectively, the human population of the entire globe is becoming older on average around the planet, although in Asia it's becoming is faster than some other places. In 5,000 days, there will be a difference, but I don't think it's a significant difference. The demographic changes are very slow, but steady. And I think overall, we haven't really grasped the idea that the world's population will start to shrink after 2070. I think that the AI is going to help that aging population. One, I think it will help the people who are older in terms of being able to do things that they couldn't do before. I think it would also help the younger generation become more effective and more efficient and more creative. So I would say in general, I think these technologies are good for an aging generation. I don't think I don't know if your question is, but I don't think we're going to be able to slow this down. I don't think it can change that rate. I don't think it's going to modify it. And it's certainly not going to have that much effect in only 5,000 days. But I do think it's a good thing that we have it. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think this is a very real trend and something we have to pay attention to no matter what country it is, but particularly in Asia.
Okay. The gentleman in the front.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for a very fascinating talk to us. My name is Donald Hanlon with the Institute of Air and Space Law at McGill University. I was very intrigued by references to aviation.
Yeah.
Within aviation, we're beginning to have a debate now going in commercial aviation from 2 pilots to 1 pilot.
Right.
And it was interesting.
Or no pilot.
Well, exactly. Apparently, the argument of going to 1 pilot is based upon the premise that, don't worry, if anything happens to 1 pilot, in actual fact, we don't need the pilot, and we're already looking at the regulatory and liability implications of autonomous AI in this context. But another trend I see also in aviation is one towards sustainable fuel. And so we're only beginning to look at that in latitude at the moment, but have you come across any mismatch between the huge demand in energy that this extra processing for AI is going to demand and the pressure towards moving towards sustainable energy? In other words, how will the demand meet that huge increase, how will the supply meet the huge increase for demand in energy?
Yeah, so right now, the chips that power the AI consume a lot of electricity. And as more and more of them are being made and sold around the world and more AI data centers, a larger percentage of the energy that we're using would go to AIs. However, I don't know what the current figure is, but maybe 1% of the energy is being used for AI.
More than 1%. Expected to be 10%, I think, in the next 10 years.
Okay, next 10 years. I'm talking about today. I think it's closer to 1% today. Okay, and so because the total internet is only around 5% or something of all the energy used on the planet. So there's a great incentive to make these more power efficient. Huge amounts of incentive. And we haven't even begun because our own brains are only 25 watts, 50 watts at the maximum. So we have existing proof that we can make very, very efficient AIs. And so there's a lot of room in theoretical room for improvement. And I think the incentives, and so right now, people are just kind of figuring out what these can do and make them really big. So we haven't even begun to try to make them energy efficient yet. And so I think that's where we're going to wind up I would be very, very surprised if the total amount of energy for AIs gets anywhere near 10%. I would be very, very surprised if it got that high. Because there's such an incentive to try and do better. And we have 100 existing proofs in this room that you can do it with a lot less energy.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Can we have the next one? Next question. The gentleman in the back, and later the gentleman in the front.
Hello, Mr. Kelly. I have one question. It's about what is your observation of the quantum computing for the next 5,000 days?
Yeah. I didn't mention that. And in all my investigations of quantum computing, I think it's very, here's how I'll say this in a kind of glib way. Quantum does not want to do computing. It's not really made to do computing. There are some specialized forms of computation, of quantum computation that fit. But by and large, most of the stuff we do, quantum really doesn't help that much. And I think the kind of discoveries we see with qubits and maximizing qubits and the different ways that we have of trying to do computation with it will be used for something else that we don't even have a name for. So whether it's sort of, I don't know, teleportation or some kind of investigation at the quantum level or actually simulation, it may be that quantum computing is ideal for doing simulations of reality because maybe there's a quantum. And so I think what quantum will be most used for is something that we don't even have on our schedule right now. We don't even imagine it. I think it doesn't really want to do computation. I think it wants to do something else. So that's, I think it will do some computation, but only in a very specialized way. So there'll be more of it, but it's not going to be doing our bread and butter computation. That's my guess.
So it's not going to be the general purpose quantum computing, but specialized.
Very specialized, and probably we're doing simulations.
Gentlemen, in the front.
你好，我有个问题是关于那个能源的部分哦，就是说有提到那个未来在这个电动车的发展上面，它会消耗掉很多的能源，尤其是在电池以及这个电力的负荷上面。那这个部分会不会是形成电动车发展的一个关键的门槛？那未来还有其他的可能去让电动车的发展可以更快速？
可以讲的比较清楚一点。所以你说电动车发展形成门槛是什么？
就是因为电池的问题是在于它的环保，就是它的回收这个。
就回收电池的部分，因为产生的环保问题会阻碍电动车的发展。
对。
OK. You got a question on recycle the battery from EV.
Battery technology is also improving very fast, and in general, the people who really look at sustainability and environmental impact believe that we could achieve 50% of our climate goals simply by electrifying everything, moving everything into electrons rather than burning carbon. And part of that is the batteries. And the thing about batteries is that there are multiple technologies, and we're still at the beginning of figuring out what those best technologies are. And I think we're going to find out that there's, for the home, where you're storing energy during the day to use at night, or put back in the grid, there'll probably be a different battery technology than what's used in the car, because of the weight, which may be a very different kind of technology that you might use for something that you have in your wrist or wearing on your glasses. So there's not just one battery technology. There's battery technologies, plural, many kinds. Some, of course, are going to be more toxic than others. But I think there's been no technology that we've not been able to make greener. We've never been able, there's been no limit on how green we can actually make technologies. So I think whatever the problems we might have with batteries of different kinds, we can figure out ways to make them greener. It's what I call a tractable problem. Those are tractable problems. Those are the kind of problems we know how to solve. There are a lot of other problems we don't know how to solve. And those are the harder ones.
Okay, please.
嗨 ，K K 你好，谢谢你今天的分享。我对你刚才最后一个分享特别有兴趣，就是你提到 optimize yourself，the method of optimize yourself， 就是你怎么去每个人要找到一个最佳化或是优化自己在进步的方式。所以我很好奇，就是您的方式是什么，以及说在这过程中有没有什么样的变化？So how you optimize yourself?
Yeah. Let me just clarify something. I do think trying to optimize your abilities is good, but I don't want to be too focused on optimization or a single thing to optimize on. I think that can be misleading. So I just wanted to say, yes, the thing that I'm trying to optimize in my life is learning myself. I want to optimize how much I learn. I want to optimize how much I can help other people. Those are the two things that I'm looking at in deciding about things that I do, is whether I continue to learn and whether I can be useful and helpful to others and help other people learn. So I think optimization and efficiency are sometimes overrated. I like to have a little kind of a broader thing that maybe is harder to measure. So when you, I'm a little allergic to having just a single thing to optimize. Maybe that's how I do. So maybe 2 or 3 things to try to optimize. That would be good.
最后2个问题，时间we'll take the final 2 questions. So yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. It seems that the more technology progresses, the more and more reports of people being more and more people being less happy with all the technological progress. And there are people who are saying AI eventually can replace the need for God, with religion perhaps. And it seems like the more people are interconnected by technology, yet in real life, human interaction becomes more and more isolated. There's less socialization. So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on AI potentially replacing human need for God or something greater than ourselves.
Wow, that's a great question. That's a great question. So there is one form already where AI has replaced God, and that's the belief in the singularity. If you've heard someone talk about the singularity is near, the singularity is coming, that's a kind of religious belief. And the way that they get there is that they can imagine an AI that gets so smart that the AI can invent an AI smarter than itself, and then that AI can invent one that's smarter than itself, and then each time it does it, it goes even faster. And so you have this thing that's just kind of making itself smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter until it becomes like God. And then that AI can either teach us to be immortal or kill us all. One of those 2. Either you're all going to die or you're all going to live forever. And so that is kind of a faith in the belief that intelligence is unlimited and can accelerate and be so powerful that all the problems will be solved and we'll have like heaven, we'll have like utopia. I think it's completely false and wrong, but it is a godlike figure and it is a religion because there are many people who really believe that. And those are some of the people who are afraid that not to be given immortality, but that it kills us all. What I call the doomers. And so it is a belief. But I think your question about, is there a spiritual dimension to AI is a really good question. And I think there has to be. I think there is the sense in which it could cause us to see the world in a different way. I think there is a way in which it causes us to reevaluate who we are and why we're here as an individual and as a species. So I think I wouldn't be surprised to see new religions sprouting up around AI, particularly if there was some way that empowered people to do things that they couldn't before. I think personally myself, I see that we're making many different species of AIs, and some of them, at some point, I think we shouldn't be surprised if an AI in the far future, hundreds of years from now, says, oh, I have a soul, I believe in God, what should I do? And that's a science fiction story, but that seems plausible to me. And I think it would be good to have an answer for them, which we don't. And but that's so far in the future. I think your question was a little bit more like, what's going to happen in the next 5,000 days as AI comes on? Will people be more unhappy than they are right now? I don't think it's going to affect negatively. I think actually people are happier in general. We have some evidence about rising suicide rates because of social media, but I think part of what I don't believe in our own measurement right now. I don't think we have a very good idea of how we measure happiness. And I think we're still figuring out those kinds of questions about whether we're happier than we were 100 years ago or maybe 5 years ago. I think we don't even know the good questions to ask. So,
do you believe there is a spiritual dimension to AI?
Do I believe there's a spiritual dimension to AI? That's a good question.
Here's a question.
Yeah, yes, it's a fair question. I would say, like anything, there's a spiritual dimension to it. I don't think that it's a kind of I don't think it's a supernatural force. I don't think AI is a supernatural force. But I do think that it reflects, like the way that, I think all technology, to me, all technology reflects the divine. Your cell phone reflects the divine in the same way that a redwood tree might reflect the divine. So in that way, yes, I think AI has a spiritual dimension. But I don't think it's necessarily different than other technologies in that way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, because it may be not so clear about whether it had a spiritual dimension, but I think people tend to sympathize with AI. Because, for example, that some people like their robots.
Yeah.
They have some kind of feeling for it. And for example, Business Next Media, we have an AI anchor that tells the audience news every day for 5 minutes. And we got some feedback from the audience that, hey, how come we don't change the hairstyle? The anchor, how come we don't change her dress? And how come she cannot move her head? Something like that. So, people have some kind of feeling for the AI anchor, like they feel for the real person. So gradually that kind of sentiment is kind of...
Yeah, I would say this. I think people will be very shocked at how strongly we will emotionally bond with AIs and robots. Okay, so not so spiritual, but emotional bonding, I think is going to be incredibly powerful, that people will come to have very, very strong emotional relationships with AIs and robots, of various AIs. So, and that's going to be, and very complicated relationships, very complicated emotions, very sophisticated, because people already have emotional responses to pets, and they don't even talk. So we're going to have something that's going to talk back to you, remember who you are, and ask you, and we're going to have incredibly strong emotional responses and bondings and relationships with these. So in that sense, not just spiritual, but emotional, there's no doubt that's going to have a very huge effect.
We have the final question from the gentleman over here.
好，谢谢那个凯文先生今天的分享，也谢谢主办单位的这个安排，让我们有机会跟凯文先生做这样的交流。然后我有一个问题，请问这个凯文先生，因为我们台湾是科技大岛嘛，然后也是科技的很重要的一个国家。然后很多台湾的公司都在找寻一个好的 AI 的题目去做。然后因为刚刚凯文先生有提到，台湾全世界都是老龄化是一个趋势。那如果利用 AI 去开发一个这种老龄化的产品，或者是结合居家，因为刚刚凯文先生也提到说，如果能利用 AI 去做一些老人不能做的事情，这个是不是一个很好的路途？或者是说凯文先生认为说，能不能给台湾这些科技公司一些建议，一些趋势的建议，这样子，谢谢。
Yeah, there's two kind of general uses of AI in business. One is where you're using AI internally to run your company, to make it better, to make it more efficient, to speed it up, to accelerate it, to increase collaboration. So it's internal use of AI in the process. And the second one is where you're actually trying to make a product that runs on AI, or a service. I don't have any real suggestions about good ideas for that. I think it's, as I said, you can take almost anything and right now you can add AI, just like they did 150 years ago when electricity came in. Almost anything you can imagine, they would say, take this function, take this job, and we'll add electricity, we'll electrify it. And a huge jump forward was made by electrifying everything in our lives, from a mill to a tractor to everything in the house, everything. So there was a huge wide open thing. So I think that's very similar right now, where you can add AI to almost anything and have it improve. But I think it's going to be much more tricky to bring AI into the process of an organization, because I don't think you can just bring AI into something. You actually have to change the organization to absorb the AI. That's what happened with electricity again. When they tried to bring it into the companies, they couldn't just bring electricity in to the existing structure of the company. They actually had to change the organization itself. They had to change how things were run. They had to change the design of the space. They had to change how people thought of themselves to electrify it. So it was not a matter of just sort of bringing in and then keeping the same organization. They have to modify and adapt the organization itself. And I think that's what will happen with AI, is that when you try to bring it in, you're going to have to actually shift and modify the organization itself to accommodate it.
So finally, if I wrap up, I just like to say that you mentioned in the book that listen to technology and let it help you understand the future. And technology basically is neutral. But slightly the positive side might be 51%, the negative side probably 49%. So technology created problems, technology solved problems overall, over time, still we move forward because with that slight difference. So you still keep that optimism, and what helped you kind of embrace that kind of belief?
Yeah, I still do have that optimism. And we didn't talk about all the problems that AI can bring. And I don't do that because other people are better at that, talking about all the problems. You can read any newspaper, and they will tell you about all the problems that AI will bring. And there will be many. And I think some of the biggest problems we're going to have are going to come from AI. But my read of history in the past, with a long view, is that despite the fact of new problems, our capacity for solving problems increases faster, and therefore it's possible that progress could stop after 200, 250 years. It's possible that progress could stop tomorrow. But it's very, very unlikely that it would. It's much more statistically probable that the same trends, the same forces at work in society for hundreds of years would continue. And that gives me the optimism to say that, yeah, next year can be a tiny bit better than last year, not by much, just a little bit. And that's compounded over time. And so it's important, I think, to be optimistic. And the reason why it's important to be as optimistic as you possibly can is because all the things in this room, all the things in our lives were made by people who believed that they could be possible when most people didn't. So somebody believed that electric light was possible, and they made the electric light, even though a lot of people thought it couldn't happen. So they had a vision of what they were aiming for, and that vision helped them make it happen. So I think it's very, very hard to have a future that happens accidentally or inadvertently. It's much easier to have a future happen if you can see it first. And that seeing it first and believing it's possible, that's what optimism is. So in a really kind of weird way, our present was created by optimists in the past. Right? Everything here was made by people in the past who were optimists. That's That's who made this world. And therefore, the world in the future is going to be made by the optimists of today. And if you're optimistic, you can kind of see it, and then it's much easier to make those things happen if you can visualize them and believe that they're possible. So the end of my sermon is to say that you should be as optimistic as you possibly can, because it's the optimists who are going to shape the future. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kelly, for sharing your insights on the latest technology. And hopefully we will keep that optimism for technology for the future. Thank you, KK.